That night I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing off the last of the dinner plates, when I felt it. Eyes on me, I turned slightly and saw my son standing in the hallway, still and silent. His gaze was not the usual absent-minded glance. It was intense searching, filled with something I could not name. I called his name softly, expecting him to look away or smile. But he did not. He kept staring as if seeing me for the first time. And then, something shifted in the air. Something that would unravel everything I believed about us. I pretended not to notice the tension in his eyes, and turned back to the sink, letting the warm water run over my hands longer than necessary. My heart was beating faster. Now I had always been attuned to energy, to moods, to things left unsaid, and something about that moment, his presence, his stillness, felt strange. When I finally turned back around, he was gone. I heard the faint creak of the stairs and the soft thud of his bedroom door. It should have ended there, a look, a pause, a silence, but it lingered. It followed me that night. I lay in bed trying to reason it away. Teenagers were strange, moody, unpredictable. Maybe he was lost in his own thoughts. Maybe he was angry about something. Maybe I had imagined the intensity of that gaze, but no matter how many ways I tried to frame it, I could not shake the feeling that something had changed. I replayed the image of his eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, almost pleading, and the silence that spoke louder than any conversation ever could. The next morning, he came down late. He muttered a quick morning, grabbed toast, and avoided eye contact. It was unlike him. He was usually casual, warm, teasing. Even that day, he barely looked in my direction. I watched him move around the kitchen, noticing things I had overlooked for a long time, how much he had grown, how his frame had filled out, how his voice had deepened. I felt like I was seeing him, anew, the way mothers sometimes do when they suddenly realize their sons are not boys anymore. The days that followed only deepened the unease. His silence stretched longer. He would watch me when he thought I was not paying attention, and then quickly turn away at dinner. He would sit across from me, his eyes drifting to my hands, my face lingering too long before flicking back to his plate. It was not just curiosity. There was a charge to it, an awareness that should not have been there. I began questioning everything. Had I been too open with him emotionally? After the divorce, too vulnerable? We had leaned on each other in those early months, me shattered by betrayal and abandonment. Him caught between parents, confused and angry. We had cooked together, laughed together, cried. In the same living room during movie nights, he had seen me at my most broken, and I had leaned into his comfort more than I ever expected to. I told myself it was maternal innocent, but now I was not so sure. One evening I called him downstairs to help me with groceries. He came as usual without complaint. As we unpacked the bags, our hands brushed a simple thing, but we both froze. I looked at him sharply, and he looked at me with a flicker of something that made my stomach twist. Fear, guilt, longing. I stepped back and busied myself in the fridge. The moment passed, but the crack had widened. Neither of us spoke of it, but the air between us had changed that weekend. He asked if we could watch something together just like we used to. I hesitated, then nodded. Maybe I was imagining all of this. Maybe he just missed the closeness we once had. I made popcorn. He picked the movie, and we settled into the couch. But even then I felt it. The space between us charged the stolen glances, the careful avoidance of touch. He sat close, but not touching me. His body slightly angled toward mine. I could feel his warmth, his attention midway through the film. I excused myself to the kitchen. I needed air. I needed space. I leaned on the counter and took a long, shaking breath. This was getting dangerous, not because of anything he had done, but because of what I was beginning to feel. Confused, flattered, disturbed, and very, very aware. I was his stepmother. I had raised him. I had watched him grow, and now I was thinking things no mother or stepmother should be thinking. What was happening to me? I decided then to pull back, to create distance for both our sakes. I started earing in doorways, watching me when he thought I was not looking. One night, I found myself crying quietly into my pillow. I missed the simplicity of our relationship. before all this confusion crept in. I missed the innocence, the laughter, the feeling of being safe around him. I missed being his mother, not this complicated, guilt-ridden version of myself who flinched at his touch and avoided his gaze. I blamed myself for needing him too much after the divorce, for treating him like an equal, a confidant when I should have drawn firmer lines. But I also knew something had shifted in him too. He was no longer a boy, and I was no longer just a maternal figure. We were both walking a dangerous line. Silent, blurred, and unspoken. Then came the night that would change everything. It started like any other quiet routine, until he knocked on my bedroom door. Softly, I sat up, surprised it was late. I hesitated before answering. "Come in," I said, my voice barely audible. He opened the door, stepped in slowly, and closed it behind him. And in that moment, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. He stood by the door for a few seconds, unsure of whether to come closer or retreat. I could see it in his eyes, the turmoil, the hesitation, the flicker of something that bordered on fear but did not quite become it. I sat on the edge of the bed, frozen, unsure of what to say. My robe was tied tightly, my hair still damp from the shower, and I suddenly felt very aware of how I looked. He took one slow step forward, then another. His voice, when it finally came, was low and shaking. I need to talk to you." I nodded, motioning toward the chair in the corner, but he ignored it and sat beside me on the bed. Too close, my heart thudded in my chest. I could feel the heat from his arm, the tension in the space between us. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral, maternal, safe, but it came out softer than I intended to. Soft. His eyes met mine, and in that gaze was everything I had been trying to ignore for weeks. He was not hiding it anymore, and I was not blind to it. "I know you have noticed," he said finally, "the way I look at you, the way I feel around you. I have tried to stop. God knows I have. But I cannot. I do not want to lie anymore." His voice cracked slightly, but he held my gaze. "You are not just my stepmother. You are something else. I do not know what that makes me or us, but I feel it. I know you feel it too." I felt the breath leave my lungs like I had been punched. I stood up quickly, pacing to the other side of the room. "You do not know what you are saying," I whispered. "You are confused. We have been close, too close. I let that happen, and I should not have. But this, what you are feeling, it is not real. It is just misplaced emotion. You are lonely, so am I. But this is not the way he stood too, but did not move toward me. Do you really believe that he asked? Because I see the way you look at me. I hear it in your silence. You are scared, so am I. But that does not make it any less real." There was no anger in his voice, only sadness and certainty. "I am not asking you for anything. I just needed to say it, to be honest, for once." I turned away, my fingers gripping the edge of the dresser. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, trembling. "Ashamed you are my son," I said. "Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters. You were a boy when you came into my life. I raised you. I protected you. I am supposed to love you like a mother, and I do. But not like this silence. Then so you do feel it." His voice was a whisper now. "You just do not want to." I turned slowly, our eyes locking again, and I hated him for seeing me so clearly, for knowing the part of me I had buried. I did feel something I had tried to kill with logic, with shame, with every moral fiber in my being, but it was still there, breathing alive, pulsing just beneath the surface. He took a step forward. "You think I do not know how wrong this is. I do. I know it every time I wake up and remember who you are to me, but I also know what I feel, and I am not here to push you. I just need you to know that I see you, not as someone broken, not as someone used up by what your ex did. I see you, and I care about you deeply." His voice cracked, and for the first time he looked like the boy I remembered, lost, vulnerable human, and something inside me shattered. I walked past him toward the window, opening it slightly to let the cold night air in my skin prickle my heart. ached. How did we get here? I need time, I said finally. I need space to think, to feel this all the way through, because right now I do not know who I am or who we are. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes but not falling. I will wait, he whispered. Even if it is forever, he left the room, quietly closing the door behind him. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, shaking. There were no easy answers, no clear lines anymore, just the raw truth of what had been said and what had not, and the echo of it in every beat of my heart. The days that followed were fragile, tender, cautious. We barely spoke, except in passing. The tension had turned into something softer, respectful distance, maybe even mourning for a line that could not be uncrossed. But I noticed the shift in myself, how I was no longer hiding from the truth of what I felt, but sitting with it, examining it, questioning where it came from and what it meant. Then one evening he left a note on the kitchen table. No pressure, just a few simple lines. I understand I love you in whatever way. I am allowed to thank you for not shutting me out. And I cried reading it, not because it was romantic, but because it was kind and real, and from someone who had loved me, with all the confusion of youth and the courage of someone willing to be misunderstood. I would never forget that night or the quiet confession that changed everything, but I would also not allow it to destroy what little I had rebuilt of myself. I owed that to both of us. And perhaps in some strange and painful way, it was love, just not the kind the world would ever approve of. But it was love. Nonetheless, the house had become quieter than usual. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that tightens around the chest and lingers in the spaces between breaths. Every room held a memory of what had been said. Every glance we exchanged in passing felt too long or too brief. I started avoiding mirrors, not because of shame exactly, but because of the questions in my own eyes. Questions I did not yet know how to answer. I found myself tiptoeing through my own life. The living room where we used to sit and watch movies now felt like a stage after a performance, empty, echoing. The kitchen table bore the invisible weight of that handwritten note he had left me. I had folded it carefully, then unfolded it again so many times that the crease was starting to tear. There was nothing vulgar in his words, nothing overt, but they carried a raw honesty that I had not been prepared for. I understand I love you in whatever way I am allowed to. How do you respond to something like that? Some nights I lay awake listening for his footsteps in the hallway, wondering if he too was staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment, wondering what could have been or what should never have been said. We had both crossed an emotional threshold, and though no physical line had been breached, the intimacy of truth, naked, unfiltered, had shifted everything. The part of me that wanted to run to pretend it had never happened clashed violently with the part that wanted to cradle that moment and dissect every inch of it. I kept asking myself, did I lead him there? Was I too soft, too lonely? Or was it something more complicated? Something about human need, about emotional proximity, about healing through unexpected connections. I remembered the way he had looked at me. Not like a son, not like a boy, but like a man seeing a woman. He respected, admired, and yes, maybe desired. That recognition alone stirred something dangerous inside me. It was not just about him. It was about me, about what I had become in the aftermath of my marriage, about how invisible I had started to feel in my own skin, and how a single gaze, his gaze, had made me feel alive again, seen not as a mother, not as a caretaker, but as a woman. And that terrified me. I started doubting every interaction we had ever shared, every innocent hug, every laugh in the kitchen, every time he had brought me coffee without asking. Had he been trying to say something all along? Or was this feeling new for both of us? Something born out of grief, of silence, of living too close for too long one afternoon. I came home early from work and found him sitting on the back porch alone, staring out at the fading light. I watched him through the screen door for a moment. He looked older, somehow wiser, as if speaking his truth had cost him something, or perhaps it had liberated him. I stepped out quietly, and when he turned, he offered a soft smile. Nothing more. We sat in silence, the air between us thick with words unsaid. Finally I spoke. "I have been thinking a lot." He nodded, but did not interrupt. "I do not know what this means," I continued, "or what it says about me, about you, but I need you to understand that I care deeply, and that is why I need us to be careful. Not because I want to push you away, but because I do not want to hurt either of us." His jaw tensed slightly, and I saw him swallow down his emotion before speaking. "I know, and I respect that. I wish things were simpler, me too," I whispered. He reached over, not to touch me, but to rest his hand on the armrest between us. A gesture of closeness that did not cross a line that was the hardest part of all. How good it felt to be near him, and how wrong it would be to lean into that comfort. That night I cried in the shower, not for him. For me, for all the versions of myself I had buried, to be who I was supposed to be, a wife, a mother, a caretaker, a woman who never allowed herself to want. And now when something unexpected had awakened that part of me, it came cloaked in impossibility. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the lesson was not about what could happen between us, but about recognizing the parts of me that had been asleep. He had held up a mirror, and though the reflection scared me, it also reminded me that I was still here, still whole, still worthy of being seen, not just for what I give, but for who I am weeks past. And though the air between us remained tender, it was also respectful. We did not speak about that night again, not because we were afraid, but because we both understood what it meant. That moment had not been about crossing a boundary. It had been about seeing one another fully, maybe for the first time, and sometimes that is enough. He began spending more time out of the house, reconnecting with friends. Friends applying for jobs, focusing on his future. I supported him quietly, proudly. I noticed the way he smiled more easily now, the way his shoulders carried less weight. As for me, I started taking small steps back toward myself. I enrolled in a pottery class. I joined a book club. I sat in cafes with no purpose, other than to feel sunlight on my face, and remind myself I was still becoming, still allowed to grow. One evening, he came home with a small potted plant. He placed it on the kitchen windowsill and said, "It is for you, something new." I smiled, not at the plant, but at the gesture. It was simple, pure, and filled with everything we had chosen to preserve, love, care, and a boundary held with grace. We never needed to define what had passed between us. Some things are better left in the quiet space where two hearts once met and decided silently to let love exist without needing more from it. And in that choice, we found our healing together, but